Hey, it's Joe. I'm back to continue how I would rank the IMDb top 100. Let's start with number 40. All right, number 40 is going to be Joker. Now, I know that this movie is kind of divisive. There's a lot of people that think that it's overhyped, that a lot of people think that it's the best movie ever, and that they're stupid for thinking it's the best movie ever. Well, I don't care. This movie, for my money, is one of the best comic book movie adaptations ever. And it's because it does its own thing with not directly adapting just a comic book, although it does have some of that. But it also mostly is like a retelling of, I'll say it, famous Martin Scorsese movies. So if you've seen or heard of The King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, which is more famous, there's a lot of that in Joker. But while some people who might not know everything, they think it's just a ripoff of those movies, you do have stuff like The Killing Joke from the comic book influence side of things. So it's not just a straight ripoff to have Joker, for example, go to a talk show like in King of Comedy, because that was also done in a comic book. So, but I just really love Joaquin's performance. I love the look of the film. I love the pacing. I love how we're in his head space, and I infer being a villain, not really I guess an origin story of a villain, or just like a villain CBM. It's definitely the best one. And you know that studios like Sony have tried to capture that with their Sony ones, the Spider-Man ones, I mean, and they're not good. Like Venom is not good. This is really good. So my number 40. My number 39 is Memento. One of Christopher Nolan's earlier films. I think it might be one of the first ones I saw, actually. Because I was watching Christopher Nolan movies, I think, as early as like Batman Begins, and I was interested in watching his older stuff. My brothers put me onto him as like a good director with Memento, and The Prestige is really good as well. But Memento, of course, like, is a huge influence in terms of like chronologically telling a story, or kind of like jumping back and forth between like the past of the chronological order of what's going on and the present, and just going back and forth. And Nolan does it really well. Like, it's really easy to go with the back and forth. And for example, I don't think he does it quite as well in Oppenheimer. For my money, he does it better in Memento, and it just works. And if you haven't seen Memento, it's not really something that I want to spoil for you, but it's definitely a movie you got to check out, because at its core, it's basically a story about a man who has amnesia, and he's trying to figure out what went wrong, what's going on, and the cutting back and forth in the chronology of what happens in like maybe in like a span of like a week or something, I want to say, is just done really well. So my number 38 next up is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. One of Jack Nicholson's best performances in a career of just some of the best performances in the history of Hollywood. And it's funny that as an adaptation, I've read online that the book is actually from the point of view of one of the other characters. But for the adaptation, it's funny, they end up making Jack Nicholson's character the main POV, and it works because he's charismatic, and what he's doing to the other patients in the mental hospital, and like giving them like a joy for life, and like pushing them beyond like the depression of being mental patients, and kind of like it's almost like a prison essentially, because in a lot of ways this shares a lot of similarities with prison movies. And of course, you have one of the most famous villains, Nurse Ratched. And it's funny what they're able to do with such a simple character, which is just like a nurse that's so dedicated to her job, but she really just comes across evil. But I'm not really sure. It's like, does she really believe that she's helping these people, or does she realize that she's harming them and she gets joy out of it? It's really something you really gotta watch, and the performance is a big part of like how you're going to interpret that character. But it's definitely up there as one of the best villains ever. And just Jack Nicholson is phenomenal in it, and so many good character actors in this, like Danny DeVito and so many that guys. Number 37, I mentioned it before, The Prestige. The Prestige is so good. It's a movie that has a great lead performance by Hugh Jackman. You've got great supporting actors like Christian Bale and Michael Caine, and it's such a unique story in terms of taking like the world of magic seriously, magic as in magicians, and just putting a lot of like drama and intrigue about it. And yeah, a lot of people might see it as taking itself too seriously. But I don't know, it works for me. I like taking this concept, and like on the other end of the spectrum you have something completely different, like Now You See Me, which takes the concept of the magicians and it makes it like fun. It's like, oh, like an Ocean's movie, and it's like, oh, it's snappy, and it's like it almost kind of like goes beyond what's possible in magic, definitely, because they're just using CGI and cool editing tricks, so that the lead actors can do the quote unquote magic. But this one, up to a certain point, is based on like real fundamental principles of just old school magic, and like magic on the stage back when people used to pay to go see these people outside of Vegas. And it's really well acted, and there's like a turning point in the movie where everything just gets reframed, and it's incredible. You gotta see it. My number 36, Fight Club. Fight Club, of course, has been what's it called? Like a famous film bro movie for years now. I do appreciate what David Fincher is trying to say with this film, and there's just so much craft to it. But it is easy to just latch on kind of like to its surface level. What it is, it's like, oh, it's the surface level of it is a fight club, and oh, Brad Pitt's in it, and Edward Norton's in it, and it's so cool that they're fighting, and it's like, oh, it's so manly. But obviously there's a lot to read into the movie, and it might not be as obvious for everybody, but just the craft and like the grittiness and the vibe that David Fincher achieves here is easily why he's considered one of the best directors of all time. My number 35 is Braveheart. I love this movie. It's so good. I think Mel Gibson gets a bad rap for other aspects of what he said in public and things like that. But I think a lot of people discredit him as a director. And I think that this movie is a testament to just his skill. And yes, a lot of people think it's not totally historically accurate. Like, who cares? Like, have you seen Napoleon? Ridley Scott says the same thing. Like, if you're the jackass saying it's not historically accurate, like, go fly a kite. Like, who cares? You're watching the movie for the movie. And this film, like, just the inspirational moments, the music, the love story, the acting, the views, like just the epicness of like seeing all the soldiers, and like his speech on the horse, and just the shots, like the way they're designed and how epic everything is, and it's just amazing. Definitely, I haven't seen this in a while, but I want to revisit it because for my money, it's probably just one of the best like history like war films. If you could call it a war film. My number 34 is going to be Inglorious Bastards. Definitely one of Tarantino's best, and he doesn't miss for the most part. Like there might be two movies of his that I think are on the verge of being just okay, but the rest of his filmography is just banger after banger. And Inglorious Bastards has probably a top 10 film opening scene or sequence of all time. Like the introduction to Christoph Waltz in this movie, like people study this, like what he's able, the feeling of the undertone of like his presence as he's introduced in the movie, and just like how scary he is, like, and just how in control he has, like the scene presence, and he commands like the location, and how menacing he is without being overtly menacing, and kind of like the subtext of what he's saying, and he says everything with a smile, but as a Nazi, like he's scary, and it's just an incredible film. But for me, number 33, Django Unchained, I think is better. It's just such a fun movie, just from beginning to end. While nothing really hits the height of that opening of Inglorious Bastards, I find that Django Unchained is just more consistent throughout in terms of how enjoyable it is, how it's crafted, the story it's trying to tell. It's just funny, entertaining, and I feel like I've always valued just the entertainment value of a movie. Like, especially when a movie is gonna be like, for example, I'm sure this is probably over 2 hours long. Yes, when a movie's over 2 hours long and it manages to keep your attention the whole time and be entertaining the whole time and have such iconic performances, and just the dialogue, because Quentin Tarantino writes great dialogue. There's like nothing to complain about here. It's just a great, solid film. Number 32, a classic, Back to the Future. If you haven't seen Back to the Future, like, what are you doing? It's a classic for a reason. Yes, if you put like a magnifying glass to it, like not everything makes sense, like, oh, time travel, but you're just being a jackass. Like, just watch the movie and have fun. It's been referenced to death and everything. It's hopefully it never gets remade. Fingers crossed. It's perfect. And while I don't love all three of the films in the trilogy equally, namely part three, I don't think part three is that good, but part one and part two are amazing films. And number 31, last for today's video, is Apocalypse Now. Now this movie has, I think, like 3 or 4 edits that you can watch. And it's funny, I've never seen the theatrical cut of this. I've only ever seen the longer versions. There's a version I think called the Redux, which is like the longest one possible, like nothing cut out of it. And there was a re-release in theaters that I caught, and it was like a 4K remaster. And I think it was billed as the final cut. So it's shorter than Redux, but still longer than theatrical. And there might be another cut somewhere. Or it might just be those 3. But this movie is perfect except for one sequence that I absolutely hate. But for the other stuff that's added to it compared to the theatrical cut, they're great additions. Just like the music, the shots, like the editing, the dissolves, like Martin Sheen being in his hotel room, drunk, and he was actually drunk in that scene, and just like looking up at the ceiling fan, and the ceiling fan revolving and kind of like reminding him of helicopters, and just the practical effects here. You have like real like napalm explosions of like just in a wide shot. Like you're seeing all these huge practical explosions, like no CGI. You're seeing these real helicopters fly by, and it's just a grand production, and you can't help but be impressed. And as an adaptation, I read the original novel or novella, Heart of Darkness. It has almost nothing to do with the novella, but I feel like it stands apart as its own story. Very, very, I would say, loosely based on the novella that it's adapted from. But you have like such an ethereal and kind of like out there performance in Kurtz, and just what Marlon Brando's able to do with that character in such a short amount of time. And I'm sure it's even shorter in the theatrical. Like for you to even get like perhaps even the majority of what he did, you have to watch one of the longer cuts, and it's still like such like a like almost like a head scratcher like performance, because he's like, I think he was like drunk on set too, and he's just like saying these things that are so out there, and like you don't really get what's going on. But there's just something about it that works. And if you watch this, if you've seen it, I recommend watching the final cut. Maybe you've seen the Redux. Maybe you've only seen the theatrical. I haven't seen it. Maybe it's the best version, even removing some of the things that I like that are extra in it. The only sequence I don't like, if you're watching this or if you've seen a longer version, is the French plantation sequence. I think it's terrible because it comes in a point of the film where something you're like at a high, and it just like slows the movie down, and I think it's like at least 20 to 30 minutes of just being slow and like catching its breath before like leaving the French plantation and going back to like this tension and just this action. And I feel like in the theatrical that was the right decision to remove it, because it's awful. And I don't care that Coppola like keeps wanting to add it in his final cuts and his longer versions. It's awful, especially from a pacing perspective. But overall, what the film achieves and what it did, like in terms of a production, you can't help but be amazed by it. So let me know down below what you think of these rankings. Leave a like, and thanks for watching.